I am concerned that taking the score away from step one kicks the can down the road to step two. And I dislike that people pull themselves away from competitive specialties on the basis of one score. However, people do that earlier in their career than if they get a lower score on step two, which happens later. And so if a metric is going to be used, it becomes far more challenging if that metric occurs later in the course of medical school. And so I think we may get an unexpected consequence of altering step one that I think we have to really be mindful of in terms of advising students.
Right. I always felt that, step one is a very stressful. I mean, it's still kind of, when is it, 2022, the first group of
this
people?
This class is the last class.
Right. So it's still currently, there is a numerical score associated with it. I always felt that step one was definitely a significant marker in medical school in terms of doors potentially closing for certain specialties you may be interested in becoming a part of. And I have plenty of people who said, no, the stress of taking standardized tests always gets to me. I'm not a good test taker, but I do great on all other tests and grades in the preclinical years. I almost viewed step one, though, as the big equalizer, because you have medical schools all across the country. Certain schools are already all pass-fail, some aren't. Professors are of different backgrounds. The material is all the same, but the way it's delivered is done very, very differently at different institutions. And so you have all of these people, all of these medical students at different places, eventually all applying for the same specialties. How do you tell what someone has learned if you're not familiar with each of the many curriculums of the medical school? Well, here you have step one, a standardized exam, where every single person, theoretically, if we take away the cost of all the study materials, has access to the information that's going to be tested. You have the same amount of time, the first 2 years, to study for it. And to me, step one was the equalizer, really leveled the playing field. If you were able to rise to the occasion and really deliver on this test that every single person across the nation took the same thing, maybe it didn't matter if your tests were a little bit wonky earlier on, or maybe you didn't do as well in the first 2 years as you would have liked. And now all of a sudden you're able to catapult yourself to become more competitive for some other specialties. And so I think if things go pass fail, people who were maybe already at a disadvantage because maybe they didn't do as well as they wanted to lose that edge, the ability to shine and show, hey, I am capable of doing really well on standardized tests. I did master the educational material from the first 2 years, even though I might have had a little bit of a bumpy start.
I think, again, you bring up really points that we're going to have to address in medical education. And you're absolutely right. It is a bit of an equalizer across schools. And when you take that away, it becomes far more challenging for schools to have some sort of metric to understand what the M1, M2 years meant across the board at very different programs, because I can tell you M1, M2 years look very different at different schools. There's no quick fix to this, right? And so the challenge with step one is the concern, and perhaps a legitimate concern, that there are biases that exist in step one. So rather than taking step one away, so probably the better way to say it is step one a true proxy for what is learned in M1, M2 year is probably the better way to say it. Are we really measuring what is learned in M1, M2 year, or are we measuring something else? And there are some questions about the validity. Then you go back to the exam and you make sure that you're measuring what is really an adequate proxy for M1, M2. And then it becomes an equalizer across the board. To take it away does introduce additional challenges. Absolutely. And so what it may inadvertently do, and a concern that I have voiced, is particularly, for instance, in ophthalmology, where there are people who apply from schools where there is no ophthalmology program, there's no opportunity for ophthalmology research, people have access to bigger names in ophthalmology to write them letters, and other people don't. Then we get into other things that may influence why someone gets a residency position that is a greater distance away from achievement on an exam. So I understand the discussions that happen around step one, and there is some legitimacy to taking a look at that exam again to make sure that it really is measuring in a valid fashion performance during M1, M2 years. Taking it away is not necessarily a free lunch in terms of moving to a holistic approach to evaluating residents.
I was very surprised at how quickly that change happened, because there'd been rumblings of step one going pass-fail for a lot of time, probably most of my medical school experience. But then just like that, it went pass-fail, and I said, wow, this is a huge change. Even just between, my sister's 5 years behind me in age. She's 5 years younger than me. And just the experience I had going through medical school and the way step one was viewed. Now, she still took step one, still had a numerical score, but the way it's being viewed now by some of the M1s who are just starting is completely different. And I really do think, M1, step one was such a Goliath, was this thing in the sky, and it cast such a shadow, over the first 2 years.
Absolutely.
It was always lingering in the background, the stress of step one, right? You knew it was a obstacle you were going to have to confront at the same time as everyone else when you started medical school. But now and then you throw COVID on top of all that, and there's just so many things in flux. Right. It's very interesting. The pilot program you talked about is